Good evening and welcome to a new episode of Mishkat al-Tanwir. Today's episode discusses an idea that has not only occupied people's minds but has consumed an entire history, with peoples, nations, and societies paying a heavy price for it. The idea of a state in the name of religion, or the state of Muslims as it is called. Let us start with a question that seems simple but actually shakes the entire foundation. Did the Quran come to establish a state or to establish a human being? This question is the key that rearranges everything from the very beginning. This is exactly what the great Arab thinker, my professor Ali Muhammad al-Shurafah al-Hamadi, worked on in his important foundational article, The State of Muslims Between Truth and Falsehood, the second part of which we published in the new issue of Kulhad magazine, issued by the Resalat al-Salam International Foundation this week. His vision also extended to the issue's editorial, which talks about liberating Islam from the grip of history and authority. We must note, the Quran did not come to establish a state, a political constitution, or an authoritarian model of governance. The Quran came to establish a human being. This is the central truth that has long been absent behind the noise of historical interpretations and political conflicts. The Quranic message, my dear friends, is in its essence a discourse directed at the human conscience. It is concerned with purifying the soul, building awareness, and establishing the values of justice, freedom, and individual responsibility. It is a message that addresses the heart before the system, and the human being before the government and the state. So does the noble Quran specify a form of governance or a political system? The answer, which is the fruit of many years of research, study, and contemplation, is no. The Quran did not impose a specific political system or a defined form of governance because it simply was not concerned with restricting humans within rigid authoritarian molds. The Quran is primarily concerned with liberating human beings so they can establish justice in any civilizational or political context. Thus, Islam, in its Quranic essence, is practiced through the human being, in their morals, behavior, and commitment to the truth, not through imposing a political entity that carries its name while contradicting its values. Therefore, the concept of a religious state is not a natural extension of the Quranic message or the first guiding light. So, what is it an extension of? Where did this state or model come from? And on what basis was it formed? Let us look closely. The religious state is a human construct that was forced upon religion when Islam was transformed from a message of guidance into a project of power immediately after the death of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. This transformation was not innocent, nor did it happen automatically without intervention. Rather, it was the result of a long historical conflict in which religion was reshaped to serve power and justify dominance, oppression, and tyranny. The human being was the center of the noble Quran. The goal was to form and establish a conscious believer with a living conscience, capable of distinguishing between truth and falsehood, guidance and misguidance, standing up for justice, defending human dignity, and rejecting injustice regardless of its source. This individual human being independently applies the civilizational values of the Quran through their own free will and choice. Automatically, from this person and others like them, an advanced civilizational society or a utopian city emerges, overflowing with goodness, love, cooperation, giving, brotherhood, altruism, and solidarity. This is the Quranic model. The goal was never to create an authoritarian apparatus that monopolizes speaking in the name of God, or a coercive religious government, which is the model of political Islam movements, whether Sunni or Shia, or to impose guardianship over people in the name of religion. This model is the greatest deviation from the essence, purposes, and divine methodology as found in the Quran. When we look back at the experience of the seal of the prophets and messengers, Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, we find that he did not establish a religious or theocratic state in the sense that was later promoted. So what is the real story? What is the model that the messenger established, and what happened after his death to lead us today to a model they call an Islamic state or Islamic caliphate, while it completely contradicts the Quranic values and verses that the Prophet conveyed regarding consultation, freedom of belief and thought, human coexistence, non-aggression, human dignity, total equality, and the rejection of enslavement and oppression. How do we understand this puzzle? Furthermore, the West has a governance and state model that is closer to the essence and spirit of the model applied by the messenger in terms of pluralism, diversity, and a civil state than the model applied by those who call themselves Muslims and raise the banners of the Islamic State. What is the story here? We agree that the final messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, established an exceptional civilizational model that we can confidently describe as a practical embodiment of Quranic values in reality. It was a model based on pluralism, intellectual and religious diversity, respect for differences, freedom of belief and thought, equality among human beings, social solidarity, consultation, brotherhood, humanity, altruism, mercy, righteousness, tolerance, and non-discrimination based on faith, race, gender, or language. This model served as an exceptional civilizational disruption in a world drowned up to its ears in tyranny, suffering under the weight of oppression, enslavement, class, and racial supremacy. The looting of wealth through wars, killing, raids, bloodshed, the enslavement and subjugation of women, and the loss of rights. The Quranic experience embodied by the messenger came like an island of light in an ocean of darkness, and as an ethical exception in a corrupt historical context. However, an exceptional condition usually doesn't last long in a world whose conditions have not yet changed, which is the way of God regarding those who passed away before. Since this experience was an island in an ocean of tyranny, the ocean's waves were too strong to leave it without resistance. Here exactly begins the decisive moment of transformation in Islamic history. Traditional powers led by the leaders of Quraysh who were accustomed to influence and power and mostly characterized by hypocrisy, as precisely described in the Quran, they persist in hypocrisy, realized that directly confronting Islam was no longer effective. They chose a more cunning and deceitful path. Outwardly, they declared their Islam under compulsion and leaned towards infiltration instead of direct confrontation, which they knew they would lose. They found that emptying Islam of its content and essence was more effective for achieving their personal interests than rejecting and resisting it directly. The leaders of Quraysh, who pretended to be Muslims, did not fight Islam from the outside. They entered it, raised its slogans, and kept its names and titles. But they did something very dangerous. They reproduced everything that existed before it: injustice, supremacy, enslavement, aggression, degradation of dignity, and looting of wealth through fighting, blood, and raids. This was, and still is, truly one of the greatest deceptions in human history, reproducing the pre-Islamic era, Jahiliyyah, under the banner of Islam. The logic of the tribe returned, class and racial discrimination returned, the duality of masters and slaves returned, the logic of the absolute ruler who borders on holiness and cannot be opposed returned, and expansionist wars, captivity, enslavement, and gathering wealth by force, treachery, and raids returned. The only difference was that all of this was now justified in the name of Islam itself, under titles like Islamic conquests. Is there anything in the Quran called Islamic conquests? God says, "There is no compulsion in religion, and whoever wills, let him believe, and whoever wills, let him disbelieve." It was also justified in the name of those in authority, who in the Quran refer to people of expertise and specialization, not rulers as found in human jurisprudential books, and in the name of obeying the ruler. Thus, the Jahili reality became Islamic in its title. Over time, this deviation evolved into a complete structure of false sanctity. Rulers were transformed into semi-sacred entities attributed with infallibility, and narrations and hadiths were fabricated and woven around them to establish religious legitimacy for political power. From these narrations and hadiths, the methodology and literature of the religious state in contemporary models like Iran, the Muslim Brotherhood, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram were established, hijacking Islam and Muslims. Simply put, the model of this so-called religious state is not an extension of the Prophet state according to the Quranic methodology. The Quranic model was applied for a short period and then its features were erased and hidden by a deliberate conspiracy. The model of the alleged religious state is actually an extension of the disastrous Jahili model that infiltrated the Quranic model and overthrew it. It is not merely a political deviation, it is the establishment of a parallel second religion based on narration, not on the Quran, using distorted interpretations of the Quran through tools like abrogation, and based on blind obedience instead of awareness and knowledge and submission instead of freedom. Therefore, the features of the Quranic model were erased and replaced by an authoritarian model that derives its power from false, manufactured sanctity and hides behind the name of Islam while contradicting its essence and values. This is the puzzle solved. But why is the Western model closer to the exceptional Quranic model applied by the messenger? The Western world lived through a different experience that shared the same root, an alliance between institutional religion and political tyranny, a forged human version of religion deviating from its divine origin. It experienced coercive, corrupt, authoritarian models bearing the titles of religion, but contradicting it and far removed from the values and legislation sent by God through Moses and Jesus, peace be upon them. But what happened? Through long and bitter struggles, the West succeeded in dismantling this alliance, separating the religious institution from power and restoring the human being as the center of the system. It managed to build political models based on democracy, human rights, freedom of belief, women's rights, and citizenship. These are values that, in their essence, are very close to the ethical features of the model embodied by the Prophet in his early experience based on the Quranic methodology. The paradox here is that the values fought by tyranny in the name of religion in the Islamic world are the very same values that other societies succeeded in achieving when they liberated themselves from the dominance of parallel, forged human religion. As for the models that still raise the slogan of the Islamic State, such as takfiri and violent organizations or theocratic regimes, they are merely reproducing the old recurring historical deviation. They are a natural and sequential extension of a grand deception that began after the death of the Prophet, when Islam was used as a cover to reproduce tyranny, treachery, aggression, supremacy, and human oppression in their ugliest forms. The idea of a religious state or a transnational caliphate is actually an extension of the totalitarian ideologies the world knew in the 20th century, like Nazism. For example, Hassan al-Banna, the obsessed teacher and founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, was fascinated by Hitler and the atmosphere of totalitarian ideologies in Europe during their rise. This was reflected in their vision of a universal central state, aiming to impose a singular model on the whole world. The idea itself wasn't far from other global experiences, most notably the Nazi experience led by Adolf Hitler, which was based on the illusion of chosenness and superiority. This same illusion was repeated by extremist takfiri groups and regimes raising the banner of the religious state. It was never an extension of the spirit of the Quran, but belongs to the heritage of contemporary totalitarian ideologies and authoritarian states like the Umayyad, Abbasid, and Ottoman states up to today, that use religion as a slogan for dominance and restoring tribal and family power, turning the state into a tool to impose a single identity and eliminate human diversity. In light of all this, we discover the profound value of the project of our great professor al-Shurafaa al-Hamadi. He does not merely criticize phenomena and dismantle their roots. He returns the discussion to its origin, to its first light, the noble Quran. The Quran did not establish a project of dominance, but a world based on diversity and mutual acquaintance, not granting anyone the right to monopolize the truth or impose it by force. Realizing this truth protects the entire world, not just the Arab region, from reproducing totalitarian models of tyranny that humanity has paid a heavy price for throughout history. Return to our Professor al-Shurafaa's article in the new issue of Kulhad and read his book, Illuminations on the Path, in its 8 parts, because the world is still paying the price for a terrible mixing between the sacred and the human. True reform begins here. By putting everything back in its place, religion belongs in its civilizational, legislative, and moral domain, politics in its domain, and the human being at the center of both. Until we meet again, my friends, the Mishkat al-Tanwir remains open, hoping the light of understanding precedes the fire of discord. See you next time.